begin with you, Malcolm, since it looks like Mueller punted on the collusion, and we know that Trump, maybe it was clever to say there was no collusion, because there's no such law, at any rate, or crime. It's conspiracy against the United States, right. Very high bar, like espionage. So what's your sense of well, give us an appraisal from your background of what really goes on in espionage in terms of the Russians, for example. I can't believe the KGB and their successor organizations would have their fingerprints on an operation if indeed Trump was controlled as a kind of Manchurian candidate, which is obviously a little over the top. My understanding is they have a process called a trusted contact, like the person whose name is on this building, Armand Hammer was one. So it's right. Carl Sagan. So where was Trump in the lexicon of the KGB's parlance?
Well, first, I had two jokes. Because it's almost no fun if I don't start with a joke. First, Trevor Noah was the one who came up with the phrase that during the election, they said Donald Trump is running like the Manchurian candidate on the platform that he is the Manchurian candidate. Right? It's like, yeah, I'm working with the Russians. You all see it, So, that's the first thing. I'm not particularly sure where Donald Trump falls in the spectrum of how we view the world, but I've been saying for the last going on 3 years now that there were I'm a Cold War baby, and I started as a baby spy at the end of the Cold War in the 1980s, and I took my counterintelligence interviews very, very seriously. So I learned that everywhere I went, Middle East, North Africa, Europe, Asia, the KGB was there. Which leads me to my second joke. So about a year ago, I'm on Bill Maher, and I say, accidentally, speaking very quickly, Vladimir Putin was the director of the KGB. Well, he wasn't. He was actually the director of the successor organization, the FSB. And as I said on the show, here's what actually happened the day that the KGB, the Soviet Union, fell. A guy comes from maintenance, and he has a screwdriver, and he removes K and G, and he takes it down, he puts up F and S. And that's how the KGB became the FSB. Nothing else changed. And as an organization that collects intelligence and collects people like Donald Trump or anyone who was vulnerable, who has these vulnerabilities, who came up on their radar in 1977 when he married Ivana Trump, who was a person from Czechoslovakia at the time, the nation of Czechoslovakia. Her own father was the reporting agent to the STB, Czech Intelligence, which is a sub-organization to the KGB. So that by 1987, when Trump wanted to go to Moscow and Trump Tower, there was already a decade of personal information that he had given them. They knew that he had thought about running for president in 1987. They knew that he was, about his financial arrangements and his prenup with Ivana, because she was telling her father, and there was actually an order for his phone to be tapped so that when he would call in, his data on Donald Trump and they already knew because they had the phone calls with him. So a lot of collection on a person like Donald Trump. That was, as Russia today likes to say, that was the KGB. Well, it's still technically the KGB. So they do, over time, they collect people. And they don't know whether you're going to be good. They don't know whether you're going to be bad. They start off with this, the spectrum starts off in the old days with the useful idiot. You guys might remember that phrase, the useful idiot. A useful idiot's someone who just does not know that what they say and do works to the benefit of their regime. Now, they're not communist anymore. They are capitalist dictators, right? They are autocrats over there running a kleptocracy in which they liquidated everything the Soviet Union had and made them all hundreds of billions of dollars, which they now share amongst about 20 people, and nobody else gets anything else. Russia, by the way, trailer park with atomic bombs. So really, that's economically, they're very poor. So you start with the useful idiot. Then you move your way up to determine whether this person can be an asset. There are two types of assets. There's an unwitting asset who doesn't know that he's working with you. All he knows is that you dangled a gigantic skyscraper in front of him and the possibility of putting his name on the top in gold, right? Being the highest building in Russia. Then that person will do whatever. They're very easy, as Asha will tell you as a counterintelligence person, they're very easy to manipulate because they have parameters around what they need. And their needs are usually through the acronym MICE: money, ideology, coercion or co-option, or compromise, and ego or excitement. Though that's the fundamentals of how they recruit people. A witting asset, on the other hand, knows that you are a foreign intelligence agency or government, and they know that you are doing something to benefit them, and they may or may not be working directly for your interests, but they know. And I said on national TV on July 27, 2016, when Donald Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, release Hillary Clinton's 30,000 emails," that he became a witting asset at that moment. So the only thing after that is an agent, and an agent signs a contract, right? Literally signs a contract to be a spy.
Not here
I don't
in Hollywood,
think that's
though.
him.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that letter of intent, you never know.
Well, hurry up and wait. The check's in the mail. So, Asha, today there was quite a bunch of news that came out of the Senate Appropriations Committee with Barr's second testimony after the House yesterday. He did say that he wanted to look into the genesis of the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Trump. And of course, that was echoed by Trump's celebratory remarks that the whole thing was a witch hunt, and he's very happy with what Barr is doing. But my understanding is we don't even know whether that counterintelligence investigation is ongoing at this moment. And what we do know about it, it was largely started, was it not, by Papadopoulos and Carter Page?
Yeah, so the big picture here. Look, the FBI has a checkered past. In the 1960s and 1970s, it engaged in a lot of unsavory activities, including surveilling U.S. citizens, Vietnam War protesters, civil rights activists. This all came to a head in something called the Church hearings, where Congress basically exposed all of this, as well as some CIA activities that were going on. And out of this came something called the Attorney General Guidelines. The Attorney General Guidelines are very strict rules that govern how the FBI can conduct domestic investigations, and particularly domestic intelligence investigations. There are various levels of approvals, there are high hurdles, there are especially protections for things that concern First Amendment activity. This is also, out of the Church hearings, is where we got FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which requires the government to obtain a court order before they can engage in domestic surveillance for foreign intelligence purposes. So I think it's just important to have that as the baseline. Having said that, look, I do think that when you have a case of this magnitude, oversight is necessary. We always want our intelligence agencies to be supervised and, to be accountable. But what we have right now is something called the IG, the Inspector General. And what the FBI did during the 2016 election is currently being looked at by the Inspector General. The Attorney General actually said that to the House Judiciary Committee, and that those findings will come out in May and June. Separately, I just want to add that counterintelligence investigations are a part of the FBI's exclusive mandate to monitor foreign intelligence activity in the United States. So basically, after the Church hearings, CIA gets kicked out. They're only allowed to operate abroad, and the FBI is doing this here. counterintelligence investigations, when we talk about the Russia investigation, it's not just, the Russia investigation. There are many different discrete investigations on various individuals. So one might be Carter Page, one might be known intelligence officers. We know that in May of 2017, a counterintelligence investigation was opened on President Donald Trump himself while he was president, because he may have been either a national security threat or because there was foreign intelligence to be gleaned from investigating him. Now, we don't know whether that was ever closed, and I think this is your point, that we don't know actually, even though the Mueller report has been provided, that is a part of the criminal side of Mueller's investigation, the charges that he has decided to bring or not bring. Counterintelligence investigations don't always result in criminal charges. There are a number of reasons for this. I won't go into them now, but some of them involve not disclosing methods and sources, because when you go into court, you have to show the person you're charging everything you have. But we don't know exactly what he's found on the counterintelligence side, whether it's ongoing. We do know that Russia is continuing its interference activities in the United States. So to your point, I think that what Barr said today is disturbing for a number of reasons. Not only because he may be investigating something that is ongoing, which is odd in and of itself, but also, and I think more importantly, because an independent entity is already investigating the very allegations of misconduct which he believes may have occurred. This is exactly the same entity that reviewed the Hillary Clinton email investigation and provided public findings on that. So I find it very odd that he wants to do his own investigation as a political appointee before even letting the independent internal investigation play out. And as he mentioned today, I find it also disturbing and somewhat ironic that he admitted that he actually has no evidence that there was any misconduct by the FBI, but yet, based on no evidence, he wants to investigate the FBI for potentially investigating the Trump campaign for no evidence. So it's very meta. We're very meta now in the Department of Justice. So I think that's where we are.
So Scott, if you wouldn't mind, some context here about what the purview of the special counsel is. You and I both think that to some extent Barr has worn Mueller down over this month or so behind the scenes. But let's go back to Ken Starr. My understanding is the reason that Mueller is constrained or circumscribed by the DOJ rules is because of the excesses of Ken Starr, and I find it deeply ironic that Ken Starr dumped all that prurient details about Clinton into the public to get him impeached, and now guess who's benefiting from the change of rules as a result of Starr's excesses? None other than Donald Trump.
Well, I think that's true to a certain extent. I think we got to go back even further than Ken Starr. I think we have to go back to Leon Jaworski. So if we're looking at the closest models and parallels to what's going on today with the Mueller report, that would certainly start with Leon Jaworski's report, and then it would go on to Ken Starr's. And in both cases there, we have a report that was done for Congress and designed to inform Congress and assist Congress in making a decision about whether censure of the president is appropriate or whether an impeachment action was to be opened up. And in both cases, they focused on facts rather than conclusions, laying out all the things that they had found through their investigation and leaving the essential conclusions to Congress to make. And there are technical and prudential reasons for that. So one of them is normally prosecutors are acting according to DOJ guidelines, to the U.S. Attorney's Handbook, applying DOJ standards. It's not clear that those standards apply in a case involving the President of the United States at all, under any circumstance, right? So, and it is clear that the Congress is supposed to decide for itself what the standards are and what process will be followed to a certain extent. And the process that is laid out in the Constitution is a quasi-judicial one, where the House of Representatives acts as effectively as a grand jury, hearing all the evidence, and then voting a bill of particulars, a bill of indictment, a bill of impeachment on specific counts, and they'll vote count by count. And that usually starts with the Judiciary Committee doing a review and making recommendations, and then the House as a whole making a decision. And then the Senate convenes as a trial court to hear the evidence which is marshaled and presented by the House. So it's a quasi-judicial process, and that goes back to things that happened in England in the 17th century. That was the model for all of this. But so that gets us through those two special counsel. Now we're dealing with Robert Mueller, and Mueller has come in after the termination of the Independent Counsel Act, under which they acted, and instead under a regulation that was issued internally by the Department of Justice, in which the Attorney General delegates his authority to a certain extent to a special prosecutor to handle and present a case. And the regulations here are tightly written, and I think your conclusion is correct, that it is concern about the abuses that happened under Ken Starr, where Starr was briefing everything to the public at every stage along the way, briefing or leaking, one or the other, or both. And I think there was a strong sense that that really was not appropriate, not the way to work. So these regulations imposed a heavy burden of confidentiality on the special prosecutor's actions, and at the end required him to make a confidential report to the Attorney General, and then left it with the Attorney General what to do with that report going on. Okay, so that now has given William Barr a tremendous amount of latitude in how to act. And I think that's been the major focus of the hearings that have occurred over the last few days. Also, was a major focus of his own confirmation hearing, what he would do. And I think there was a great effort to extract from him a promise to treat this more in the historical vein, more the way the Jaworski and Starr reports were done. I think that tees up the major issues we have today. And it also tees up some major questions about the Mueller report itself. So, we were told, for instance, that Mueller did not make a recommendation for criminal charges on obstruction, and instead that he deferred to the Attorney General on that issue. Now, actually, the Attorney General has now pretty much acknowledged that, well, while he suggested that in the letter, that really wasn't true. Or that was something of a stretch, because he was forced to acknowledge under questioning that no, Mueller did not, in so many words, defer to him. And of course, if we look at the historical precedents, we know why. Because Mueller was looking very clearly, I think, at the Jaworski and Starr precedents, and he was preparing a report while formally under the regulations preparing a report for Barr. Nevertheless, he was following the precedent of the two prior independent counsel and doing a report that was really for Congress, allowing Congress to look at the facts that had been collected and form its own judgments. So I think that focuses us very narrowly on the major issues that exist with respect to the Mueller report.
And do you think he's aware of the broader context, which is that this is the most consequential investigation in perhaps American political history? And I don't know whether he knows that or whether he cares.
I think he's certainly aware of the historical importance of this, but I think Mueller, everything about, now you've worked with Mueller, so you'll have something to say on this yourself. But from everything I've seen, observing him over the years, he is a company man. I think he is a slavish adherent to procedure and process, and he doesn't ever challenge the person who is one rank above him. And in this case, his boss is the Attorney General. So I think he is not going to challenge or criticize the Attorney General. In my mind, I think he's going to be called before committees in the House, certainly 2 different committees in the House, to testify. And to me, I'm really keen to see how he's going to field questions that implicate the judgments that were exercised by Barr, because I think his instincts are going to be to say nothing.
Asha, well, go ahead.
Well, let me ask you a question. Where's his sense of honor? I mean, I keep hearing, look, I'm a combat veteran. He is a combat veteran. There are just lines we will not allow to be crossed. And I put a lot of faith in that he would uphold the Constitution above all else. Clearly, William Barr has been sent in as the dagger. He is now killing young princes in Denmark. So that's his job. He has done it. He has literally taken us to the point where Donald Trump has decided he can now attack and use the Attorney General to get rid of his enemies. That's how I see it. I only come from the street level, so usually people are using my information to get at other people. But if someone were to use my report, my assessment, and then come out and completely absolve somebody who you clearly said is not absolved, and you were going with the Jaworski model, and they were going with the Hamlet model, and the only thing you can do is sit there and wait for them to be called in. Is that where Robert Mueller's head is? Because if it is, we're screwed, because we have no men of honor left.
Asha,
your boss.
Well, you work for him. I don't know how well you know him. But.
So, I'm going to agree with portions of each. So with Scott, I would say I do think he's somebody who plays by the book. He's not going to exceed what is the scope of his mandate that are provided in the special counsel regulations. And we saw this, for example, in the fact that he kept his focus on the Russia collusion issue when he came across potentially other crimes, such as campaign finance crimes. He actually farmed those out to the Southern District of New York. He did not follow this. So he took that mandate very seriously. And I think he is also very aware of the politicization of this investigation. Now, remember, the purpose of the special counsel regulations, the whole idea of appointing a special counsel is to reassure the public's faith in the integrity of the administration of justice. Okay, and so that you know that this is being conducted independently and objectively, especially when it's against the President of the United States, when there's a political appointee. He's a smart man, and I think he is aware of that. Here's just a couple of things, breadcrumbs, that I would put out there. We know that very early in his investigation that his team was researching very closely the pardon power. Okay, he had, and I admitted a good number of them to Yale Law School, and many of his prosecutors are very, very smart scholars, people who had clerked for the Supreme Court, and they were researching what is the scope of the president's pardon power. In other words, very early on, he was playing chess. He was looking at what could be the outcome when we look at particular paths of prosecution. And we also know that he was coordinating with at least the New York Attorney General. And we know that because they've already brought charges against Paul Manafort. So I would not discount him so quickly. We know that he has farmed out threads of the investigation that may not relate directly to his mandate. We know that he is aware that the president has the potential to pardon people. He's most likely to pardon people who are closest to him, like Jared Kushner or Donald Jr., and that were he to do so after he indicted someone, that would eventually, essentially provoke a constitutional crisis, right? Because then, you're sitting there with this person potentially pardoning conspirators or something, and again, I think we can't discount the fact that there is a whole side of this investigation that is not criminal and that is counterintelligence. And the standard in counterintelligence is not whether there is evidence that you committed a crime and whether it can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. The threshold is, are you a threat to the national security of the United States? I don't think that that piece of it was included in that report. That report, because it was modeled on the Watergate and previous special counsel investigations when there wasn't a Russian asset in the Oval Office, were really about a criminal investigation, and they didn't contemplate this piece of it. So I think there is an entire portion that could make its way to the Intelligence Committee or the Gang of Eight that he has taken into account, and potentially pieces that are either in other U.S. attorneys' offices or even in state attorney general's offices.
Well, that segues directly to what I want to ask you, Malcolm, because I was the rule of thumb is whoever Trump attacks, he's afraid of, and he's been attacking the chair of the House Intelligence Committee viciously. So, and he's the logical person to get the counterintelligence report. Nunez, of course, is organized. He's now working with Barr to do this bogus investigation, to investigate the investigators, and he's naming all kinds of names and stuff. So, what's your sense of? You seem to think that there's a cover-up underway, right?
Yeah,
to put it bluntly.
the day after, I think it was the day before the Barr memorandum came out. No, I think that came out on a Friday, right? It was the day after I was on Joy-Ann Reid's show. And the question that came to the table was, is this a fair assessment of what Barr is doing? Is he not going to release the report? And everyone was very confused about what was actually said. The one thing that he put out that was very specific was he had made it clear from the Mueller team that there was no criminal standard in terms of conspiracy, and therefore there was no Trump-Russia scandal, right? That everything and I said this, I have seen all this with my own eyes, okay? I saw Russia, if you're listening. I read Donald Trump Jr.'s memos to that. Unless this is the greatest collection of coincidences in the history of mankind, and I coined the term Nance's law, right? Coincidence takes a lot of planning. That's just an intelligence community fundamental. There are no coincidences in our world. And this is hundreds of contacts with Russians. No one is that stupid that Russia could just flood the zone with all of these assets, agents, persons of influence in order to co-opt you, to change your foreign policy, which you did after 30 years of dangling a hotel in front of you, of which you signed a letter of intent. There cannot be any conspiracy there. Is just laughable. It's laughable. So, I'm not saying that to play to the audience, all right? We're not crazy. Because I was told the next day everything I wrote was a lie. And I wrote counterintelligence information. I wrote what I saw the Russians doing. 2 books about how the Russians did it, and then created this frame of reference, this information bubble around the Trump team, so that everything the Trump team did was in Russia's benefit. And then I saw the Trump team interacting with them. So that same day, I was asked, is Barr covering this up? And I said, and I can't even believe that I have to say these words because I hate conspiracy theories so much. But this is no longer conspiracy theory. I said, how could he possibly cover up the greatest scandal in the history of the United States with the greatest scandal of the history of the United States? Because that's what it would come out to if he covers it up. I think he did it. I think we have now the second greatest scandal in the history of the United States. No, we have a president of the United States who has clearly, Asha, by all standards of counterintelligence, you or I at the first contact would have been hauled in, clearances taken away, triple lifestyle polygraph and by multiple agencies, not just the F.B.I., and they would have just wrapped a circle around us and said, we're going to assume you're a foreign spy, and you're going to confess to us, or you're going to help us figure out why we assume you're a foreign spy. That doesn't appear to have been done here. Jared Kushner goes into the Russian embassy. He asks for secure communications that NSA and CIA couldn't intercept. That is Espionage Act. Everybody else would have gone to prison for that. So did Mueller give him a pass? Did he give him a pass? Was Donald Trump Jr. just an idiot when the Russians sent in their representative and talked about trying to lift sanctions and he thought it was adoption? You know, Ted Lieu, I'm going to co-opt everybody's jokes tonight. Ted Lieu made the greatest assessment as a military judge advocate general officer when he said, if this were two airmen and they emailed to each other, hey man, I got a kilo of cocaine. The moment you responded, if it's what you say, I love it, that's criminal conspiracy. But all of this didn't happen apparently, and we're all crazy.
So, on the note of craziness, what do you think, if you agree with Malcolm, what is his motive? Is he trying to save the Republican brand? He's always trying to save Trump, but I don't understand. What's your reaction?
We're talking about Barr.
Yeah.
I'm going to defer to Scott on this one.
Nice one.
I mean, look,
Well, he wanted your counterintelligence assessment. You agree with his assessment? Yeah. That this guy was a prime case of Trump?
About Trump?
Yeah.
Trump is so easily manipulable that, I think he would be such an easy target for intelligence. I mean, the person working at CBS would know that you can just flatter Trump, offer him some money, put a name on, pillow or something. I mean, he will do anything. You put his name on it, you offer him money, and you flatter him, and he is yours. That is so easy. And so you don't even, I think where people get tied up is that criminal conspiracy, the elements of conspiracy is that you have to have an agreement with two or more people to commit a crime, and you have to have an overt act in furtherance of that agreement. So if Malcolm and I decide, we say, let's rob a bank, and Malcolm goes, I don't know why I'm picking on CBS tonight. So he goes to CBS and he buys a ski mask, then we have moved forward towards this conspiracy. The problem is intelligence does not work that way, okay? There is no way that a trained FSB officer, KGB officer, whatever you say, is going to sit down and say, here's the plan. And especially with someone that they don't have to do that with. Right. Now, this is actually, it's a difference than the way our intelligence agencies operate, precisely because we operate on these very rigid rules. When I was in the FBI, if I had an asset, that asset had to agree to work for the FBI. I couldn't have somebody who was an unwitting asset for the FBI. They agreed. We would create a file on this person. There are all these hoops to follow. Russia does not work that way. And so, they are going to take what they can when they can and in whatever form they can do it. So I completely agree with Malcolm. As far as Barr, I don't know. I'm going to pass that baton on to Scott because I find it incredibly puzzling. This is somebody who is a former Attorney General of the United States, and as members of the legal profession, you understand that your reputation, the legal profession is very unique in a way, right? It's not like finance. Your currency and your credibility, I know that was really mean. Your currency and your credibility isn't about how much money you make or what position you have. It is really about your professional integrity, the quality of the arguments that you've made. The lowest paid lawyer who goes into the Supreme Court and wins that seminal Supreme Court case is going to have a lot of respect in the legal community. And adhering to the strictures of professional responsibilities, defending your client within the strictures of the code that you have as an attorney. For Barr, who has a pretty good career, who was at a point, I just don't get why he flies in. I mean, it's Rick Wilson who says everything Trump touches dies. So you come in, you agree to work in the Department of Justice, which has been under attack, and exactly what Malcolm says. If you are then trying to cover up what Mueller has found in a 2-year investigation, you are now at best, just throwing your reputation away, at worst, engaging in criminal activity.
Scott, before you answer that question, can I just say something? Are we in a post-integrity environment with lawyers? I mean, because as you spelled it out, Asha, I don't see integrity here. I was in the green room with Jay Johnson and Joyce Vance. And the first thing they do is they start throwing out their university cred, right?
And he's the former head of DHS.
Right, former head of DHS. And I said, this is some weird thing with lawyers, right? Because amongst spies, we don't go around and say, oh, I did this mission, I did that mission. I just go, I'm spooky, you're spooky. But if Asha's saying Barr has fundamentally corrupted this, are we now in a post-integrity world at justice?
Well, I think John Yoo introduced the post-integrity world.
Oh, well, I must have gotten it through osmosis.
It goes back a way.
Oh, John Yoo, yeah.
John Yoo.
Waterboard
right at
brother.
Berkeley.
Remember that.
Yeah.
But I think looking at what's going on right now with Barr, I would say there's clearly a game plan that's going out, and the game plan is deflect and distract. And it may be against the background of assumption that somehow a substantial part of this report is going to come out, probably not as a result of his decision to release it, perhaps as a result of a judicial decision forcing its disclosure or a leak. In fact, it's interesting that in his testimony today, he said, it would be a shame if that happened, but that might happen. It's like he's clearly thinking and worried about it. So what does he want to do? So he wants to slow that down as much as he possibly can. And he wants to create counter-narratives. And the counter-narratives he's using, there's nothing new in any of these counter-narratives. They're exactly the same ones that Devin Nunes, God bless him, or maybe it was his cow, that they've been tossing out for the last 2 years constantly. The same things, poor George Papadopoulos, and, poor Carter Page, isn't he being oppressed? How dare the FBI go investigate this guy who was mentioned as the subject of an espionage prosecution and not as a subject, as a person of interest in 2013, so that goes way, way, way back, way before the election or his involvement with Trump in any way. So all of these themes have been trotted out, have been used over and over again, and their purpose is not that there's anything of substance to them, but it's a bright, shiny thing to distract you over there. So that's what's going on here. And how does he understand his position? I spent some time talking to people who worked with him at the Justice Department before, and this is Bush 41 when he was Attorney General, and what I found was, mostly speaking with Republicans, I think they had a positive impression of him, but it's not that he was an objective company man, as I said with the case with Mueller. Everyone agreed that this guy was the most partisan person they'd ever encountered, or certainly one of the most partisan people, and that his expertise and the reason he was appointed as Attorney General at the end is exactly what you said. It's put the dagger thrust in the throat of the special prosecutor. That he put together a plan to shut down the Iran-Contra prosecution, and he implemented it. And his advice, we didn't know before what had happened. I mean, we now know those archived memoranda have come out, and we know that he advised the first President Bush that the path to ending all of this and preventing you becoming the subject of a prosecution later under your successor, because this was in the just months before the commencement of the Clinton administration, is for you to grant pardons to all the people who are obvious targets of this special prosecutor. And then we'll go to the special prosecutor and tell him, there's no point in your continuing your work. You've come to an end. These people have all been prosecuted. And that's exactly how it played out. He shut it down.
Right. And at the time, William Safire, a conservative columnist, referred him as a partisan hack. but,
which he is. And
Right.
He was and still is. Yeah.
but you have a question? Because I want to.
Just such a genteel conversation about Barr. I mean, you're all being very nice about this, all right? I'm in a red hot on fire panic. But this guy, you know, are we all just this? That's why I said post-integrity world in law, because you're all having a very nice discussion about what he is, what he's going to be, how nicely he's going to roll out the assassination of the Mueller report.
I mean, I think that, I think the you comparison is actually apropos. Look, you wrote the torture memos. These were actually, in my opinion, a completely bad faith interpretation of the law that went beyond the responsibilities that a lawyer has for any client. Like it was a twisting of the law to justify something that was actually not justified. And he was actually reviewed by the American Bar Association as a result. I don't know. I wonder if it's not about the post-integrity, but this way in which we exalt these public officials so that they never have any kind of lasting accountability, right? Because John Yoo is now a tenured law professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And he teaches classes and he gets invited to speak, and I'm sure he gets paid for it, and he's totally fine. And we're seeing this, I think, in other ways. So it's not just the legal profession.
And Jay Bybee, too.
Well, Jay Bybee, and not
judge.
just the legal profession, Kirsten Nielsen.
Yeah.
She's left. I think we're all, Kirsten. But, I guarantee you this woman in 10 years will be appointed to another post. And this will come up, and it will be just like with Gina Haspel and the CIA. It's be like, let's just put that behind us. That was a really bad time. And so there's a way in which I think we allow our public servants some kind of, I don't even know, like a waiver or something like that,
Political
because
path.
as a person who served, they are not truly accountable for what they did.
So we have to rename it the Herman Cain syndrome.
999.
So just a quick question, because it's a good time to write up questions here, because we'll be taking them very soon. One thing that came up in yesterday's hearing before the House, Barr was asked about whether or not the White House had received the report
Yes.
or a draft of the report, and he did not answer that. Is it possible that he's already shared it with the White House?
Well, my view, he would only give that answer if, in fact, he has shared it with the White House. And the question is, in my mind, how did that sharing occur and how far did it go? And the quasi-okay way to share it would be for him to brief the White House counsel about it. The absolutely inappropriate way would be for him to brief the president about it. But in this case, I don't think either of those is an acceptable approach. And so that answer, I think, is one of the more shocking things to come out of these 2 days of hearings. So you've got Barr, I think we can say now, dissembling about the report in his 4-page letter, clearly misleading people about what it says, and refusing to provide it for Congress, although I think it was written intentionally, very clearly for Congress, but providing the information to the people who should absolutely not be seeing it.
The subject of the
subject of the investigation. That's egregious conduct.
Can I just make a note here, just a trip down memory lane, that remember when Hillary Clinton was being investigated for her emails and her husband Bill met with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch on the tarmac, that contact was deemed to basically taint the entire investigation to such a degree that any outcome was no longer reliable and therefore required an inspector general to review it all at once. So I just want to make sure that we have that kind of comparison, because that was a big deal that was made at the time.
Can I make a quick comment about what you just said? So you said, based on what you've seen over the last few days, or last 2 days, that it appears that Barr is dissembling, right? That in the answer of whether he's had contact with the White House. Do I have to be anger translator
He wouldn't
here?
answer that question.
I know he wouldn't answer that question. Yeah, but in my world, we have a Samuel L. Jackson phrase for that. He's a lying MFer, okay?
He would have had to have denied for it to be a lie.
He is too slick to lie. I mean, when you look at,
That's right.
at his hearing for confirmation, this man is the dagger in Cloak and Dagger. He is here to put an end to this. He is ridding us of a meddlesome priest. And the problem is when we have these discussions on television, I got to call it out when everybody else wants to have a legal free-for-all and talk about what was like at the Yale Club. This is the, look, I'm sorry. We've all served, at some point in government, but I've been a lot closer to the bullets than all of you. I've survived 3 suicide car bombings, all sorts of crazy things, naval battles, hitting a mine in the Persian Gulf. I take this attack on American democracy very personally, all right? So why do we keep pulling punches with these guys? That's all my question.
Why isn't a background check run on presidential candidates?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Great question. So, just so you know, Donald Trump would never pass a background check for any kind of clearance. I mean, and I know this because in the FBI we conducted background checks. The FBI has a mnemonic that it uses. We were trained in this in Quantico, and it's to make sure that you cover all of the bases when you go and interview somebody when you're doing a background check. And that mnemonic is Carla F. Bad. And Carla F. Bad stands for character, associates, reputation, loyalty, ability, finances, bias, alcohol, and drugs. So you go down that list and you find out. And this kind of gets to why it's not about the criminal standard that matters. There are many people who don't violate the law who don't pass a background check because there is derogatory information that comes up on any one of those factors that makes them a risk, okay, that makes them untrustworthy to hold a position of public trust. So basically, anyone in government has to pass a background check in order to access classified information, in order to be able to even access sensitive information. So the question is, why doesn't the president? Well, the president, like members of Congress, is essentially automatically cleared, okay? The qualifications for the office of the presidency is laid out in the Constitution of the United States. You cannot add another requirement to become president without adding a constitutional amendment. So, I mean, I think that one possible solution is that the parties, for example, could require this as some kind of, the hoop that candidates need to go through in order to be on their ticket. But it couldn't be any kind of legal requirement in order to actually run for the office.
Yeah, technically, you electing him has cleared him for every secret America has.
That's right.
Good job.
So, so Malcolm, since you're giving us the pessimistic version, I'm not suggesting it's not accurate, but it's pessimistic. Can Congress really get to the full report?
Well, I think Asha and both Asha and Scott have mentioned this. The Gang of Eight, right, who are the 8 people who have the exact same clearance as the President of the United States, who, by the way, were briefed in August of 2016 by the director of the CIA at the direction of the President and the Director of National Intelligence to tell them that the Russians were attacking the nation by attempting to co-op a presidential campaign, elect Donald Trump president. That's happened once. Will they see...
Mitch McConnell sabotaged that.
Yeah, well, Mitch McConnell said, if so long as you put the word Russia in it, I will have nothing to do with it. He put the knife in it. A lot of knife throwing tonight. So the point is, will Congress get to the bottom of it? I think they will. I think they will have to see it. But now that's me being my happy, optimistic self. My realistic self, which has seen I've seen far too many crazy made for TV conspiracy theories in the last 2 years that have all come true. It's just absolutely ludicrous. I think the fix is in. I even hate saying those words, but I'm literally watching the machinations of this. Not as a lawyer, but I've collected a lot of secret information in my time. I've watched every third world dictator and potentate screw over their people, backstab their generals, and throw people literally into ovens. And now I'm watching the laws of the United States being corrupted, and I am not confident the Gang of Eight will see everything.
So,
Wait, 'cause Scott-
Feel better?
No, 'cause he said a legal answer.
I think Congress has two bites at this, right? So you've got the Judiciary Committee, which has its throw at it. I think Barr told us today, and he told us yesterday too, he's not going to give them the report through that process. And he almost invited them, go to court and try and force me to do it, knowing that that's a process that probably can't be completed within the 2-year term of this Congress, right? So he feels comfortable about that. And the alternative is the intelligence prong. And there, I think there's far more legal and constitutional basis for them to have access to the report. And there's a really consequential thing, and that is, again, it's the brilliance of Devin Nunes. So Devin Nunes went to the mat with the Department of Justice to force disclosure of information behind the FISA applications. That's in this very case, right? And DOJ waived its objections and provided what he requested. I think Adam Schiff is smart enough to know that, you've waived those objections. You must present the report. And I think the experts, the people in the Office of Legal Counsel and elsewhere in the Department of Justice are going to say he's right.
Can I just add on
Go
the
ahead,
report
okay.
piece? Yeah, I agree with that. I would also say that there is also in the USA Patriot Act, which was passed after 9/11, a mechanism whereby grand jury information that involves intelligence and national security can be released to the Intelligence Committee. And I'll just say that in general, I mean, things just don't stay secret in our government for very long. Okay, I mean, we know
And that's a good thing.
and it's a good thing. I mean, we know all the shenanigans that CIA was up to in the 70s, and we know about Iran-Contra, and we know about Watergate. I mean, all of this stuff comes out. So suppression, I agree, I understand the panic, but it will come out. And I think, as you said, it will be even worse for the people, as it was in Watergate and, all these other times when it comes out and they are shown to have tried to suppress the truth.
Okay, but you're dealing with professional mollifiers here who have figured out the system that so long as 1/3 of this nation won't believe a damn word you say, they will continue dismantling the Constitution. And they're doing a great job of it. So, yay, it's going to come out. But we're going to have a completely different president and Congress who will defend the Constitution and will say, oh, by the way, in that last administration, here's everything they did. No Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. We're going to have to go to trial. And
if we're not a banana republic by that time.
well, we're already well on our way if we're not in jail.
So let me ask you: are you on the board of the Nation magazine?
No,
Contributing editor or something?
I'm a member of the Institute. But
Okay. Oh, I see.
I take no responsibility for
Okay. Well, here's the question.
especially on these issues.
Trump's defenders are even the Nation magazine characterize Barr's March 24 letter as stating that Mueller found no evidence of collusion. But the letter doesn't say that. Isn't it entirely possible that Mueller found some evidence of collusion? I don't know the rest of it.
Yeah, I think that's a major point. So when we saw people scurrying to do a victory lap and suggesting these are all lies and delusions and so forth, they relied on one specific passage of the letter, in which he said, the words he used were that the factual findings of Mueller did not establish a criminal charge. That's the word. So that was then taken to say that there was no evidence of collusion. That's not what that means. Not at all. I mean, particularly for a cunning lawyer like William Barr. I mean, So let's back that up a little bit. To start with, we've got the question of the law. What's the law, and what's the charge they're trying to bring? And I think this is I think a very important point. Maybe it's a little bit legalistic, but it's consequential here. All the things that you were talking about earlier about espionage and so forth, or trading in secret information and so on. Yeah, I mean, that's not present with this kind of active measures campaign. So if we go back and we look at the Espionage Act of 1916, as it was subsequently amended, it was designed to deal with intercepting secret communications, selling secrets or classified materials, defense secrets, information concerning atomic weaponry or weapon systems or avionics or other weapon systems or other sensitive technical information. And there are a few other categories. But it was very clearly compartmentalized and very tightly drawn. So if we look at this active measures campaign as it's conceptualized, that clearly is outside the parameters of the Espionage Act of 1916. So what does that leave you with here? I mean, it leaves you with two things that we see discussed an awful lot. So one is the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You're acting for a foreign government, and you didn't register with the Department of Justice, which you should have done. You should have filed those forms, right? Hasn't really been enforced by the U.S. for a long time, and it has been in the last couple of years, suddenly very aggressively enforced. So you've got that. And then we have election finance. So the argument that, well, everything the Russians were doing here is sort of an in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign, and it wasn't reported by then to the FEC. Well, of course, they may not have even known it in sufficient depth to have reported it, but there's never been any finding of that kind or any prosecution of that kind. The only thing that's happened in that area in the past has been a foreign government or foreign individual making a contribution to a campaign, which was then not recorded. That has been prosecuted before, right? So I think he was making a special search for that. So I'm assuming he didn't find that, or didn't find much of it. So that means that everything you said, Malcolm, could be absolutely true, and Barr's conclusion that it didn't establish a criminal charge could be true as well. And we
But
don't.
it's
We
still
won't
a
really
national
know.
security threat.
And that,
Right.
And that's a totally different prong, the national security. And that's the reason why the counterintelligence part of the investigation is the critical aspect that I think people need to know.
Well, it's also, I think, a component of why he doesn't want to release private information or information related to people who aren't being charged. Because we all know there's at least two people, I think at least three people. You know, you have Donald Trump Jr., you have Jared Kushner, and I think Michael Flynn Jr.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Ivanka.
Oh, Ivanka, she's got her own issues, all right? When you're working with the Azerbaijanis, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, I can wait.
You did miss Eric.
How about the Panama drug dealers in the Russian?
You're going to have to wait a few years till we work our way down to those prosecutions.
They're innocent third parties.
Yeah, but my point is, and I think you were about to mention it, I've been involved in a national counterintelligence investigation, okay? When I worked at the National Security Agency, someone who had formerly worked across the hallway from me went over to the Russians and sold them $1 billion program where lives of Americans were at risk by the hundreds every year for $36,000, right? Every person on the third floor of NSA, military, non-military, went through the full, rigorous, full lifestyle, multi-spectrum counterintelligence polygraphing and interrogation in case we happen to have met that guy at the water cooler and went in on that plan. There appears to have been a waiver for this White House, okay? I mean, what we're talking about here, if we had a state of war, it would be treason, okay? Let's be honest. And it appears that everybody was giving kids gloves. Donald Trump Jr. wasn't interrogated. The president was allowed to give questions. This is the single most serious investigation since Major Talmadge found Benedict Arnold had jumped onto a British ship and that he had a spy literally in his hands who they hung the next day. So why are we taking such kids' gloves with it
Well, I think that one reason is that it's administration, and before that it was a political campaign. So I mentioned before the church hearings. I mean, anything implicating First Amendment activity, so definitely in this campaign period, would have had this extra bubble of protection. And then, of course, once you get into the presidency, you get into a problem where, okay, guys, the president has a lot of power. Okay, he has the almost unfettered discretion in foreign affairs. So when you are looking at he's being conciliatory towards Russia, well, it could be evidence that he's compromised, but actually it's also, what he's allowed to do. That's what he was voted to do. That's what the Constitution gives him power to do. And so you get into this very difficult constitutional issue of how do you start to delineate when someone is acting because of corrupt motives or because they're just making bad policy and bad or unwise decisions. And that is actually not illegal. And I think this is where the obstruction case kind of also hits a wall, because the president fires James Comey. He's allowed to fire James Comey. And so the question of the obstruction statute is, did he fire James Comey for a corrupt motive? And yes, okay. He said so the next day on the Lester Holt interview. Okay, yes, okay, for all of us, that's evidence. But I think part of the question with, and this is about the sufficiency of the evidence, I think that one thing that we need to remember is that the Department of Justice, needs to believe that it has evidence that it can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in order to decide to indict, and it needs to believe that they are going to win if they were to bring that case. So that's the high standard that they have. And then I think that with Donald Trump in particular, you have this additional problem that when we normally think that when someone is obstructing justice, they're doing it in secret. Okay? You're going to come up with the secret emails where they're, not like every day on his Twitter feed. Okay? And so there's a way in which the blatant way in which he threatened the attorney general, that he basically said that he was thinking of firing Mueller, all of these things. I mean, there was other evidence too, but it almost mitigates. It's like, oh, well, that he couldn't be serious. There's a way in which his, I think, outrageousness protects him in this administration.
It's worked his whole life. So what you're saying here is, if you want to run as the Manchurian candidate, run as the Manchurian candidate, just like Trevor Noah said.
Exactly.
I'd make just another point here. So if we look at national security prosecutions that have occurred, you have to sort of look at the system as a pyramid. And it's very rare that there's a prosecution brought at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Right? So the system just doesn't work that way. The people at the top are shielded in a sense. And there's a question of, can the sovereign commit treason? Can the sovereign violate the constraints or the confines of national security legislation? Of course, in America, we say
he's not the sovereign.
He's not the sovereign because the people are sovereign, and he's subject to the law as everyone else. In other countries, that wasn't the tradition. And for the Founding Fathers, for instance, they had the experience, for instance, of Charles II, the first sovereign put back in after the Civil War in England, who conspired with the King of France against the interests of England and launched a war against the Netherlands to support the King of France. And we now know the King of France was paying him the whole time. And what happened in the English system? Nothing. He was the sovereign. Nothing could be done about that. He was betraying the country. Well, too bad. It's his privilege to do so.
So I showed
That was
Malcolm.
the first who was beheaded, not the second.
I showed this to Malcolm, and he actually wants to address it. Is Bill Barr a Russian asset?
That's a provocation.
I wanted to have that question asked so we could keep the jokes rolling. Because we gotta get out of here with a laugh, otherwise we're gonna be crying. No, he's not a Russian asset. He's worse.
Okay.
He's worse than a Russian asset. He's a Trump asset.
Oh,
Okay, and no, really. And if the Russians were handling him, we would know about it. Look, I'm sorry. I worked at the National Security Agency. We're really good at some things. And with our allies working together, which is why we know a lot that you're never going to know about on Trump Russia, that, like, for example, which came down in that indictment of the Internet Research Agency. There's a report about how the Dutch did it. I think that's like 10% of what really happened. But they were watching through their own cameras, the guys log in as they came to work every day at the Internet Research Agency. That's how good we are, and that wasn't even us. That was our sister agency that we allowed to do that particular thing. So we're never going to do that. So get all that conspiracy theory out of your head. Does he work for Trump? I am flat out convinced of that. I am sorry. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have to discuss which club he went to or which university he went to or whether he has any integrity as a lawyer. He is clearly the knife. And he is here, and what he is killing here is our faith in the Department of Justice. I hate that I actually have to say this. Today, I said to myself, I do not trust the Department of Justice anymore. I don't, because I have literally watching it being dismantled and turned into a Trump cog that is working to protect a man that we know most likely has, in some way, has some behaviors that in any other world would have been considered treasonable.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think exactly what you're saying, and there was a lot of assent in the audience, means that he is a Russian asset to some degree in an unwitting way, because one of Russia's goals, of course, is to undermine our faith in the legitimacy of our institutions. And even going back to active measures under the KGB, I mean, active measures are not new. They've been going on since the 60s.
1970.
But one of their main goals was, because they understood that this was such a fundamental pillar of American democracy, was to try to erode Americans' faith in the rule of law.
Right.
So, you know, I say that because I don't think that your feelings are irrational. I mean, I am astounded when I see what he's doing too, but I do think that it's important to remember that there are the Department of Justice is like the country's biggest law firm. There are hundreds of people who go to work every day, and the Attorney General is at the top. We've had bad Attorney Generals in the past. We've had them under Watergate, but that is not everybody who is there, right? And I think the very fact that we had a special counsel appointed, that we had an investigation actually be able to continue for 2 years, that there is somewhere, by the way, an indestructible report. I mean, I've worked in the FBI. Their digital case system, you can't tamper with it. Okay, nothing can get deleted in there. So even Bill Barr cannot do that. It is there, and so I just think that it's important that we continue to focus our disillusionment on the specific individuals as opposed to doing it across the board, because that is exactly what Trump is doing when he paints the FBI as X or the intelligence community as Nazis or judges as so-called judges. You know, there can be people who are not living up to their professional responsibilities, but I do think that the vast majority of people in the intelligence community, in the Department of Justice, in the FBI, are doing their jobs.
Right.
And I do think that the rule of law will prevail.
I'm speaking from the intelligence community side because we do our job, all right? We don't ask for any recognition, but once that stuff is turned over to the Justice Department, it becomes evidence. And all I know is that this had better turn into a Grisham novel really quickly. And some hero lawyer had better emerge.
Right. Well, one of the questions here is, are we waiting for Daniel Ellsberg?
Well, you know, I mean, I think in Barr's testimony today, he seemed to assume that someone like Daniel Ellsberg is out there who's going to leak the report. So it's America. This happens here.
Right. So can democracy survive if a party puts winning ahead of morality and the Constitution? Who wants to take that one?
Joe Scarborough wrote an op-ed about 2 years ago. I quoted it in my last book. And I was really taken by it. I mean, emotionally taken. And for those of you who don't know, I'm from Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia. I come from a military family. Every father and son back to the Civil War. Now my niece is in the Navy. She was in combat off of Yemen last year. I take this very seriously, okay? I literally can go down to where all of the American experiment was written, okay? And so when I see people choosing party over the Constitution, over all of the founding principles. It's pretty obvious, all right? Scarborough wrote in his op-ed that the founding fathers, especially Hamilton, Madison, and Adams, all wrote that there would eventually come a tyrant. There would eventually come someone who would try to emulate King George. I call Trump sometimes King George IV, right? That somebody would do that, but they never foresaw that the Congress would go over to him and would allow him to run roughshod over the Constitution, to essentially become a Politburo, right? Like a Soviet emir. So that's where we are. Now we reversed that last December, okay? But my problem is I don't see the Democrats, they're working at it, but they don't understand that, they've come to a knife fight with a Bible. And they're preaching while they're being slashed every day. And I see the dismantling the Constitution, and it offends me deeply. I just don't like it. But you know what? Until we all collectively stand up and say we've got to put an end to it. Sitting around and going, I'm not a big fan of sitting around waiting 2 years to see how much more damage can be done.
Will Robert Mueller ever publicly speak about the investigation, primarily to tell what is true or false?
He will have to. So he's going to be summoned to testify before, I think, at least 2 committees in Congress. And he'll have to testify. He'll have to respond to questions. I think the dynamic that will play out there is he'll be there and there will be counsel from the Department of Justice in the room telling him what questions he can answer and what questions he can't answer. And the question is going to be to what extent are they able to foreclose his full discussion of things, and to what extent will he testify notwithstanding instructions from them to do so? Because I think there is, I said before, I think he is someone who, within the Department of Justice, acts as a company man, respects the Attorney General, but when he's called before the Congress and sworn and asked to give testimony, the situation's different. And I think there it's quite possible he will be far more forthcoming about what happens. But that's a major question in my mind.
So here's a CIA question for you, Asha. What specific active measures are currently being undertaken by Putin, Russia, or anybody else? And I imagine that's referring to the Chinese lady who showed up at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this could be its own panel. When I describe active measures, current active measures, I typically think of, and a way to understand Mueller's investigation is kind of 4 different threads. So you have one thread, which is intrusion and hacking. We saw that with, for example, the DNC server, and this is basically using illegal means to get information that's then weaponized, and that is exactly what was done with Hillary Clinton's emails. Another thread is disinformation and propaganda. This is very hard for us to combat because of our First Amendment. We have traditionally believed that the marketplace of ideas kind of sorts itself out, and that speech begets more speech, and bad ideas will eventually fade away, and good ideas will always kind of, it's like capitalism for ideas. But social media actually distorts the marketplace, right? Because it allows the amplification of ideas that would not organically survive on their own in this marketplace. And I don't think we've found a way to deal with that. And I think that it truly impacts the way that people are perceiving, politics and their environment and their fellow citizens, actually. And we saw that Russia actually brought physically people out into spaces to scream and fight at each other by scheduling protests for different sides in the same time at the same place and targeting them to different places. And then a third thread is political influence. This is the Maria Butina. These are people who are acting kind of covertly, sleeping with them. I mean, whatever they're doing, and basically, essentially getting people on board with influential people, policymakers on board with the objectives of the host country. And then I think that there is potentially a campaign finance thread where they are using the loopholes in our laws, as Scott mentioned, as a way to use straw donors or legit organizations within the U.S. to funnel foreign money, which can then influence how our candidates react. So, I mean, all of these require different solutions. It is not going to be one big thing, and it's not actually going to be something all that the government is going to be able to solve. And that's the only reason that I pushed back on Malcolm, and what I think are his very legitimate feelings is that I do think that we have to be cognizant of our own way in which we start to lose heart and become apathetic to our own democracy, and to remember that I think that there is sort of a silver lining to all of this in that civic engagement has increased. More people are paying attention to what's happening. They are getting essentially legal degrees on Twitter, okay? I think more people know the standards for FISA than probably ever in the history of the universe. They're protesting, they're voting. All of these things are good. And I think that these are kind of a shot in the arm to why democracy is important. And I think we can't fall into the abyss that nothing matters and I'm just going to go wear sweatpants and watch Netflix.
Well, that's a good point. I want to touch on one active measure. I want to give you an example. You were talking about Russia using places like troll farms. 2 years ago, there was a convention in Pasadena called Politicon. It happens every year, the Comic-Con of politics. And I was on a platform with Joyanne Reed. We were doing at the MSNBC booth. We found out that 72 hours before we went on, we found a thread, a Twitter timeline that was mimicking a real person. And it was a real person's name, except that instead of there being one underscore, there were two underscores. Used his photo, his kids' photos, his whole bio, everything. And we found that timeline. We found that for 90 plus days, there had been putting up pictures of me with a crosshairs on me and a wanted poster that came from Rocky and Bullwinkle. And going after Bill Maher, Joy Reid, myself, Michael Moore. When we tracked it down, the reason we tracked it down is 72 hours before we were supposed to go on. We knew that this was a bot because it was putting out the same thing over and over again. But 72 hours before, it turned over into a human handler. There was someone behind the keyboard. And it started tweeting that, I'm coming to Politicon to kill Malcolm Nance and Joy Reid. And we, of course, notified the police, but because I worked at the National Security Agency, I got friends, and they saw that it was actually a VPN that was in Denver. And the person said he was from Denver, and he was only posting on pro-Trump tweet groups in Southern California, people who could actually come to Pasadena. And we tracked it back to St. Petersburg. It was part of the Internet Research Agency. So it went from just automated responses to where they were actively watching the Joy Reid show, knew precisely which room we were going to be in, and then were challenging people to come watch an assassination. And when the assassination didn't occur, those people would use their fist and their voices or whatever because they were denied a murder. This is what we call marionetting. And it sort of has stopped using bots. We now see online trolls, real people behind keyboards. They have replaced the bots because bots are easy to spot. So this next coming election, you're going to see lots of conservative vigilantes, we call them, are now doing this, and you're going to see lots more human interaction, which is almost impossible to stop.
So there's a question here about how does Stephen Miller fit into this picture?
Baby
I
Goebbels.
think we can spare ourselves that, but
Whoever didn't go on a date with Stephen Miller when he was, 16, is totally responsible for all of this. I'm sorry, but that is true.
He grew up in Santa Monica, too, didn't he?
It's Samo High. So, Scott, but a little twist on that. Bill Barr is very, very dedicated to the Federalist Society, and he's close to Leonard Leo, the guy that's picking all these judges. Is it possible that that's a motive? In other words, he's saving the Republican Party from a meltdown. I'm trying to think about why this guy's doing what he's doing. He's saving the Republican Party from a meltdown so that they can put all these judges on the course.
Yes, I think that's exactly what's going on. So, I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever that he was brought in, Bill Barr was brought in, through the machinations of the Federalist Society and through Leonard Leo particularly. So who solicited the 19-page memorandum that he wrote that was an audition for this position, and who presented it to Trump? It was definitely the head of the Federalist Society who did this. And what is their principal concern? What's their role with this administration? They have been the group that vets and recommends the judges to be put forward. So I think that is what they are keen to protect in this administration. That's the value it brings to them. I think they're less concerned about a number of his policy choices, build the wall and put kids in cages and who knows what it is this week or next week. But the judiciary and control of the judiciary, that's their reason for being. And I think that also is very near and dear to the heart of William Barr, right? So what does he want out of it? That's what he wants. And that's not inconsequential. That's important because these people have life tenure.
You've just described essentially a modern, updated version of Mortimer and George from Trading Places, all right, making a $1 bet, all right, that they can either win or destroy things on the stock market. So, you're saying that that amongst the conservative world, all right, the conservative intelligentsia, that they have this ability. Lawyers, there we go.
Lawyers. And they call
put people in their place.
They call themselves the movement conservatives.
There's nothing conservative about what they're doing.
I don't think so.
So I think we're past our witching hour here, but we can have a couple more questions. Is it possible or likely that Barr ordered Mueller to finish his report before it was completed?
I don't think that is a plausible. Yeah. So the reason is that the special counsel, first of all, while I believe that Mueller I agree with Scott that he's a by-the-book person, I also don't think that he's someone who is cowed into completing investigations before they're ready for him to complete them. He's a pretty no-nonsense person. He handed me my credentials when I graduated from Quantico, and his inspirational speech to my graduating class was, if you don't like this job, there are 60,000 people ready to take your spot so you can get out. So we were all like, okay, and then we walked up and shook his hand and got our creds. So, I just don't see anyone pushing him around. The other thing is that if he didn't want to conclude his investigation and, basically said, I have more to do, and Barr said, no, I am not approving any further investigative steps, I am shutting this down. The special counsel regulations require that any time that the attorney general denies a request from the special counsel, he is required to report that to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees and the ranking members. So if he had tried to, basically that is a provision that is meant to shed light on any attempts by the Attorney General to obstruct the special counsel, or to just stop him and to make sure that those reasons are good and sound and are subject to oversight. So I think if something like that had happened, that is the mechanism by which it would have become public. And I also just don't think that Robert Mueller would be somebody who would have worked for 2 years and then been like, okay, I'll shut it down because you said so.
Well, a last question for Malcolm, and then each of you can do a little, whatever you want to say, and whatever you feel that hasn't been covered, okay? What fail-safe is in place to protect our democracy and its institutions?
Oh, that's easy. You're the fail-safe. And I'm going to tell you right now, you better be slapping your kids upside the head if they're not voting. I did with my kids. You know, they didn't have much enthusiasm about voting in the 2016 election, especially my daughter, who's gay. And I literally had to have the famous comedian, Jewish gay comedian Judy Gold, call her and say, "What's your problem? You get out and vote for the community." So this is all the motivation. I'm a father. So this is the entire system is built on the strength of you actually caring as much as I do. All right. I mean, look, Asha, I know it sounded like I'm dissing the process here, and I know I got a little discouraged, but you know, I do believe that we have the ability to wash this all away, right? And we can have the ability to do it fairly, you know. But I also know we have the ability right now to call all of this to a grinding halt and hash this out with a series of charges and investigations that should, you know, if Madison had anything to say about it, we would have had impeachment at the first blush of this, just to find out. And it's up to us to push this stuff on to the Senate, hold a trial, and convince them as the jury that whatever is going on is a high crime or misdemeanor, right? Because believe me, I mean, this is pretty. If Bill Clinton having a consensual relationship was a high crime, okay, and that he supposedly did perjury based on the flimsy standards that they have. We have a president that's lied 9,417 times as of 5 days ago when I looked it up in Germany, and I mean, he's probably over 10,000 by now. So unless we, all of you, all right, and we know that you care because you're here on a Wednesday night, all right, to see a completely jet-lagged me come here and lecture you about what you're supposed to be doing anyway. But you have to. We have to be the fail-safe. Because I'm telling you, the guardrails were holding pretty well until Bill Barr got that memo out. That night, I received death threats. All right, I had people calling me, "You're a liar. Everything you've ever written is a lie." I literally had a campaign called Fire Malcolm Nance from MSNBC, run by the guy for that big bald-headed guy from NRA TV, Dan Bongino, all right? And we got thousands and thousands of people commenting to do that. They are on the attack, and I'm sorry. I am a service member. I always say I am an American fighting man, right? I serve in the forces which guard my country. I'm prepared to give my life in their defense. Robert Mueller should have known that the minute this thing became political and that Bill Barr went out and recharacterized it, there is no way, unless he is just so loyal to the Bureau, okay, and the Bureau's procedures and saying that, well, that's just the way the Attorney General does it and my job is done here, I would have stormed onto CNN and I would have just burned him to the ground and I would have made sure there's no Attorney General, you know, that could stop whatever it is I have to say. Or he's part of that lawyers club you guys seem to be so fond of talking about, and that he was not the Elliot Ness we always thought about. Look, Al Capone murdered people, okay? There was a garage full of dead bodies, and the only way that we got him was through his accountant. But you know what? He died in jail of syphilis. And so, which means justice was served. I do not know. I mean, I've got a political garage full of bodies out here for the last 2 years. Is justice going to be served equally well?
Scott, anything you want to...
Well, I just repeat Malcolm, you know. I mean, that was great. Can't top it. But I'd cite Abraham Lincoln. You know, he said, in a democracy,
Oh my God, you start one of them stories.
power of public sentiment is everything. So the fact that people pay attention to this, read, stand up, and speak, that makes all the difference in the end of the day. And I think, this whole campaign that Barr has mounted and coordinated with Trump and with Devin Nunes and others, it's all designed to persuade people there's nothing there. It's over. It's done. Exonerated. Totally exonerated. And of course, we know that's not true. And I think we now see from the first public opinion polls, nobody bought that, except Glenn Greenwald. He bought it, But other than Glenn Greenwald, nobody did. So I think things are not going so well for them on this right now. And I think if there continues to be a press for release of the information will come out. It'll come out sooner rather than later. And it'll come out either through the legal process or because, God bless him, we find another Daniel Ellsberg who leaks it. And then we'll know when the report comes out. And I think the truth that the report presents, I think is going to be a lot closer to Malcolm's truth than to Bill Barr's.
Last word from you, Asha.
Yeah, so I agree with what Malcolm and Scott said. I think the voting, the engagement is really important. I would also encourage people to not tunnel focus on just the Mueller Russia stuff, because there are other things that are also problematic which are related to this. So for example, the declaration of the national emergency at the border is a part of an encroachment on the separation of powers between the president and Congress. And people need to be as outraged about that, because when Congress can assert itself and reclaim that authority, that is also going to empower Congress to be able to take steps in other places. So, we can't compartmentalize these things. In terms of the fail-safe, in addition to voting and engagement, I would say states' rights, baby. Okay, I would not discount the possibility that states, and in particular the state of New York, but possibly other state attorney generals, may be pursuing further investigations on the people that you feel like have gone free. There are a number of things. I think in New York, there are potential financial violations. We know that the New York Attorney General, the New Jersey Attorney General are looking at Trump's inauguration funds. There are state crimes that could, and we already know that in New York State, for example, there was a civil suit against Trump's foundation, which was dissolved in December, and that may also be going into a criminal arena. And in terms of all the things that are discouraging you, Bill Barr has no say in what happens with state attorney generals. And Trump cannot pardon state crimes. So, and I think it's still I think it is an open question on whether a state could indict a sitting president.
I think they can.
I think they can too. So, let the games begin is what I say. At the end of the day, what our framers saw is they created this system. They put all of these fail-safes, but in the end, we have federalism, which is where the states also have a lot of power, and I think that we should not discount that here.
Well, I thank all of our guests for coming here tonight, and I thank you all for coming, and good night. And God bless.